Supercross 3 was a solid effort at the motocross genre, but it left a little bit to be desired in a handful of areas. Thankfully, Supercross 4 smartly builds on what worked in 3 and takes some swings at improving the formula. Not all of those swings are home runs, but they are impactful enough overall to make this follow-up to Milestone's previous Monster Energy-fueled effort a worthy foray back into the ruts of the Supercross world. First off, you'll notice that Supercross 4 looks pretty familiar, with lots of the previous modes returning, but on closer inspection, you'll see that they've generally all been expanded upon in ways that really add to the experience. A quick note before we move forward. Please consider subscribing and enabling all notifications by clicking the bell icon to get new video updates. And while you're at it, also, please click the like button if you enjoy the video. It really helps us out. And with that out of the way, let's begin. While the career, track editor, and compound modes are still front and center, we see deeper versions of these modes and more to do in them than the previous game. The career is revamped with over 100 riders, 11 stadiums, and 17 tracks, all of which you'll be racing on throughout the main career, the events, and championship modes. The track editor has new, much more intuitive modules that are easier to use while also markedly more advanced than the last one. And the free roam compound is a great way to mess around with friends, brush off your rusty skills, or just get your sea legs as a beginner. As you get better, you earn ability points that can be spent in the career mode to help with cornering, quickness, overall constitution, and a handful of other things. So, by the time you've put in a bunch of hours into the game, you'll be racing your way with your style of racer, which is a nice thing to have in a game that relies on individual skill as much as this game does. Game modes and technicals aside, the game looks pretty good on the PS4 Pro overall, which is the version we're reviewing here. It's still not quite what I would expect from a 2021 game, but all things considered, I have no major bones to pick, outside of some mediocre textures in the environment here and there. If you compare it to the previous game, there's no other way to slice it than admitting it's an improvement, but judging it on its own as a motocross game released in 2021 might be a tad underwhelming. That just depends on your personal perspective, I suppose, but you're unlikely to feel too strongly about it in either direction. One nitpick I will make with this game's presentation, however, is the fact that the default camera is pulled in quite a bit more than most games of this type generally are, and there's a reason for that. This can make some hectic moments where lots of racers are bunched up together that much harder to navigate out of, as well as just generally limiting your peripheral vision, which is not a good thing. I understand that Milestone is probably trying to show off their noticeably improved graphics, but in this case, it can come at the cost of functionality. Also, I would have traded in the upgraded graphics for a better frame rate personally. With some games, I understand the argument for detail and high resolutions over frame rate, but with racing games, I just don't. The PS4 Pro runs the game at a very solid 30 frames, but again, something higher than that would have been nicer to see, even if it came at the cost of some of these new visual bells and whistles. On the audio side of things, you have a pretty similar story. The bike sounds have noticeably more depth to them than most other motocross games, but that's to be expected. And other than checking off that particular box, it doesn't do much with the sound to really blow your socks off. The bikes sound distinct from one another, but not so much that you would really notice without paying close attention to a side-by-side comparison. I was expecting a bit more of a crunch upon landing to let me know how good or bad I was hitting the slopes, but there wasn't a whole lot there. And if you're not in the mood for an incredibly intense, frenzied soundtrack, then you're out of luck. Every tune you hear from the main menu to the final race sounds like it came right out of a can of Monster Energy, which I suppose is the point, but it would have been nice to have a break from it here and there, at least while in the menus. Maybe I'm just old. Something else Supercross 4 has on its predecessor is the significantly improved way ruts are handled on the tracks. While the previous game barely showed any effect for landings and slides to have on the dirt, Here, ruts are clearly visible as they are constantly being created and overridden. It looks nice and helps sell the immersion more than it might seem like just by watching a video of the races. I just wish they went a little further with it and let the dirt build up and break down in bigger, more impactful ways. Still, it's nice to see this much improvement over the last game. You're not going to see any of the track's main grooves get totally blown out or anything, but the impact that riders have on the track is a nice touch, albeit a bit more superficial than I would have liked it. With a more realistic approach to ruts and track design also comes a strikingly more responsive handling style. This is one of the biggest changes you'll probably notice from the fourth game, as your momentum is much more malleable depending on the topography you're dealing with at any given moment. And while that is more realistic, it can take some getting used to for folks that are more arcade-oriented, like myself. That said, getting this down pat and learning the ropes in this more realistic manner is extremely satisfying once it all clicks. And until it does click, you can feel free to make use of the rewind feature, which is something that some folks don't normally like to see in racing games, as it can make it feel kind of cheap. But the good news is that here you only have 3 uses at the start of a race, and you have to earn additional uses of the ability to rewind by doing more spectacular things and generally just racing well. So that's a nice counterbalance that I think most purists should be able to tolerate. At the end of the day, Monster Energy's Supercross 4 is a nice improvement over the last game. So much so that I would say it definitely warrants its existence for those who enjoy the genre. And that's not something I would say about a lot of the recent modern motocross games. This one gets the formula right where it counts most, with the balance of options and customization with pure skill and challenge. It doesn't hold your hand, but it also gives you plenty of tools to race your way and ultimately become better faster than you would in a game with less interest in the player's personal proclivities. For that, it's a pretty easy recommendation for veterans. The game's new ideas and visual upgrades do outweigh its shortcomings in my opinion, but if it could have only spent a little longer in the oven and ended up with either a better frame rate and/or a more satisfying auditory experience, then we would really have been cooking. But even still, as it is, Supercross 4 isn't a bad ride at all. And that brings us to the end of the video. A quick request: we upload new videos every single day, and if you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing. It really helps us out. Also, don't forget to enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon so that you can receive daily video updates. Thanks for watching.